Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the privacy talk. I'm quite so honored to invite Ashley in this interview. So she's very proactive to work on the human rights. I respect her work. I'm very glad to have an interview with her this moment. Thank you for Ashley to come into this moment.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to introduce her profile. Ashley is a human rights lawyer and a published author on international law, public health, privacy, and human rights. She conducted the research, written papers, and delivered presentations for human rights, NGOs, and advocacy groups. She's won an award for academic excellence in statutory analysis, public health, and property rights. She's led the formal corporate efforts in technology social responsibility, AI ethics, and employee civic engagement. Ashley has a Juris Doctor degree and a certificate in the public international law with honors. Ashley worked at Apple for nearly 7 years and at Nike before that. She's been directly accountable for the success of high-risk, multi-million-dollar projects for over a decade. She's managed global projects, programs, policies, and a message. So again, thank you for having this moment.
Yeah, very happy to be here.
Thank you. So I'd like to move to the agenda today. So you have been working at the Apple or the very excellent careers so far. So could you tell us about your history and your work at Apple?
Yeah, I joined Apple in February of 2015. I had been at Nike for a few years prior. I was running software releases there, and I came over to Apple to run iOS software releases at Apple. So everything it took from planning a brand new release to it actually going to a customer's phone. And then I moved on to a program called Early Field Failure Analysis. And I was responsible when we'd ship a new iPhone or Mac for any major software issues that caused bad press or customer concerns, figuring out what went wrong, making sure we got it fixed and we had proper communication. And then the last few years, I worked in a group called Product Integrity. And I was chief of staff for a couple executives there, and I ran big projects and programs. And then I also spent a summer in Apple Legal, Software Products Legal. They asked me to lead a project to create the foundation for Apple's AI ethics policy and technology social responsibility policy, which was really interesting. And then I was also tapped to lead a company-wide civic engagement project for employees, so around voting and getting engaged with our democracy. And any type of company-wide policy at Apple, something that critical, is really complicated, but it was pleasant to tackle them and build out foundational work that I hear is still used today.
Thank you. I have reading some of your experiences so far, then an Apple experience that you've been a very excellent careers, but there is a little bit some concerns with your past things. So could you tell us any concerns related to your experience in Apple last year?
Yeah, so due to a series of very unfortunate circumstances, I ended up feeling it was necessary to escalate some of my concerns about work conditions at Apple to the public through the press and social media, and also in filing complaints to the government. It was all triggered by concerns about unsafe work conditions and Apple's response to my concerns. But through the process, I also ended up disclosing a number of other concerns, including Apple's troubling surveillance of their employees, really gross invasions of our privacy, harvesting of our biometrics, and general intimidation tactics to try to silence us and keep us quiet about everything they were doing. I tried to work with Apple for months, but they really weren't able or willing to engage in a constructive way, so I resorted to becoming a whistleblower. Here I am today.
Yeah, that's very important to insist to yourself. So maybe that you were struggling to talk with the Apple in this case. So could you tell us any reactions from the company of the behavioral actions?
Yeah, Apple is not very receptive to any type of feedback about these type of policies with their employees. And Apple's also known to be, one of the most secretive companies in the entire world about their internal business practices, almost comically so sometimes if you read the articles about it. They were not pleased about me speaking up even internally, let alone when I went public. So when Apple fired me shortly after I went public, I had a number of open complaints against them with the state and our national government. And I was in the press nearly every day talking about my concerns. And they did not seem very happy about any of that. And at the time they fired me, they didn't offer any specific reasons why I was fired. It was very general and vague. And they didn't warn me before they fired me either. A week after I was fired, I got an email from one of their law firms hinting to the reason, but I wouldn't see the official reasoning until March of this year. And come to find out, Apple claims they fired me specifically for exposing secret anatomical experiments on their employees, harvesting employee biometrics, and installing internal apps on our phones that took secret videos of us all the time, including in our bedrooms and bathrooms. And to me, coming from a company that markets a really strong stance on privacy rights, it was truly a bizarre justification for terminating a long-term, very successful employee. And I don't deny expose the things they pointed to, but I disagree that they would be justification for a termination, especially for an employee that's already had open cases with the government against that company. And because their justification for firing me is that means we also get to debate these specific issues they raised in agencies and in court, which I'm actually kind of weirdly looking forward to, probably because I feel so strongly about privacy rights and I kind of want to make an example of them for taking such a disrespectful position to their employees.
I understand. Yeah, that's very serious to face against of the big actions. So in these moments, you became lawyers now. Then, so could you tell me the why you decided to become a lawyer and what is working as a lawyer at this moment?
Yeah, I started law school in 2018. I had been working in professional functions for 20 years with these big companies for the last decade. But I really wanted to do something more direct with common good and helping the community and helping people. And there's just such a great need in this country right now. So I started in 2018 and I would take weekend and evening classes at a law school for 4 years. I finally graduated in June, which is really excited about. While I was still working full time, that was a lot, but it was really important to me. And then now I'm preparing for the bar exam in New York.
Yeah, that's very good results because lawyer is not easy to become getting a career. So that is a very excellent work. So I want to back to the something the issues happens during the career because it's very important employees' privacy. So what did you learn about the privacy rights in the United States through these processes? Could you tell us about it?
Yeah, and I have to admit, I didn't know much about employee privacy rights and law before I spoke out, which I guess was kind of dangerous. To me, it just seemed like common sense that an employee should be able to protest these types of invasions of privacy. Apple pestering me to take detailed scans inside my ears, like made my skin crawl. Taking secret videos of me inside my bathroom also just seemed inherently wrong. But after Apple came out claiming this is why they fired me, now it's a legal matter. So I had to start researching in the law to figure out what my best arguments are. I can't just say, oh, it seems wrong. Like I actually need to cite stuff. So I started digging. And my lawsuits are really complicated. I'm pro se, so it's just me. It was a lot of original research. And as I began researching, I was really astonished to see how many protections there actually were in the state of California in the United States. There's protections at federal level too through our National Labor Relations Act. So don't even, create the impression of surveillance while employees are doing protected activities, like maybe talking about forming a union or asking for improved work conditions. But California really went above that. They actually have a constitutional right to privacy that extends to private employment, which I was very impressed by. It helps my case. So Article 1, Section 1 of the California Constitution provides that privacy is among the California people's inalienable rights. And a court explained that constitutional privacy provision is self-executing, so it confers a judicial right of action on all Californians, and privacy is not protected merely against state action. It is considered an inalienable right which may not be violated by anyone, like an employer. I was like, oh, that's helpful. That's amazing. I mean, this is the common sense, right? It should be a constitutional right. It should apply to all of our dynamics and relationships. So I was really happy to see it included in California's constitution and their cases. The legislative history too is the right of privacy is the right to be left alone. It is a fundamental and compelling interest. It protects our homes, our families, our thoughts, our emotions, our expressions, our personalities, our freedom of communication, our freedom to associate with the people we choose. It prevents the government and business interest from collecting and stockpiling unnecessary information about us and from misusing information gathered for one purpose in order to serve another or to embarrass us. Which I was like, that's why are these employers doing this in California? You know, these big tech companies, a lot of them do this kind of stuff. It was very hypocritical for Apple too, with Apple's marketing stance about privacy. But the law is so clear that we should have rights around this stuff. And there's case law going back decades protecting employees from retaliation for protesting certain invasions of privacy, even if they signed a contract saying they do it prior. Things like polygraph tests, videotaping in locker rooms and bathrooms, tracking GPS of employees, similar circumstances. There's also state labor codes protecting employees from videotaping in very private situations. It was really interesting to me because, you know, that prevailing view in Silicon Valley is really the employee signs that contract. And even if that contract's, you know, facially illegal, the norm is kind of like, well, they signed it and they got a big paycheck, so they waived all of their rights. And that's just the way it is. Like, it's very that kind of mentality, at least here. But here I'm looking at this law that's directly contradictory to that. So even if you sign a contract, you can still protest. So you have this constitutional right that still protects you. So essentially, you know, the invasions of privacy, if you waive that under your contract, it's invalid under public policy. It's essentially preempted by our Constitution, which is remarkable.
I see. Yeah, it's a very controversial in this moment. I think the tech company has been a little bit, it's been acquiring this woman, and it's been a very difficult situation in tech surge in the market. But now it's been the shrinking a moment, and it's been a stock price and many of other concerns. So that's been direct to the other employment condition that it's been a very important notice here as well. So on some articles, you have tried to bring your concerns to the other country, some of the European countries as well. So could you tell us about why did you decided to go there? Then also, what did you do there? So yeah, please tell me.
Yeah. So when I received Apple's position statement in March saying all of this is why we fired her. I was like, are you kidding me? What? I really couldn't believe what I was reading. It was so crazy to me that they would justify a termination on protesting invasions of privacy and share that justification with the government. That really made me feel like they do not care about employee privacy at all. And I found it so unsettling and hypocritical. So, you know, during my research, I discovered far more protections of employee privacy in other countries. And Apple has offices in all these European countries, and I know that they do some of this same weird stuff to them from the teams I've worked with and talking to them through the years. So I decided, you know, I'll share my complaints and what happened with me and see if they'd investigate. Maybe they can go to those offices, ask questions, try to figure out what's going on. And if they happen to find the same issues or other issues, their laws are so much stronger. Maybe they'd be able to act where the US and California wouldn't. Because again, when I get this letter from Apple to the government saying, oh yeah, this is why we fired her, it's fine, I'm getting worried our government will actually do anything, even if the law's on my side, because Apple apparently thinks that that's not a problem. Like, that's their legitimate justification. So I'm like, okay, France and Germany, you try. So I did file to a bunch of different countries. And there were extraterritorial issues, of course, because I wasn't in those countries. I don't have the firsthand evidence that it's happening there. So some of them had to get, either kind of dismissed or paused until someone could come up with a complaint of someone that's there. But as far as I know, Germany is still investigating, and there's a big office there that, per LinkedIn, does a bunch of the facial biometrics work. So I'm very interested to see what comes of that.
I understand. I think the biometric is a very important part of the privacy-related topics all over the world, especially for under the European regulations. So, what did you run through your experience about the employment privacy rights from other countries?
Yeah, I read a lot about GDPR. So GDPR's view on employment relationships provides that even employee to employer consent on certain matters of privacy must be freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous. And consent is not freely given where there's a clear imbalance of power between the data controller, like an employer, and the data subject, like an employee. So the Article 29 working group talked about this at length. And they essentially say, given the dependency that results from the employer-employee relationship, it is unlikely that the data subject, an employee, is able to deny their employer consent to data processing without experiencing a fear or real risk of detrimental effects as a result of the refusal. So what they're saying essentially is an employee cannot consent. Even if they said they consented, it's not consent to their employer because it's such unequal bargaining power. And that really comes to play with matters like biometrics and real, invasions of privacy, like certain videos and optical surveillance. So ultimately under GDPR, and especially in France and Germany with their own national laws, the government generally believes that employees can't consent. Like they don't even recognize it. It seems like they say like, oh, maybe you could pay, but even with the payment, it seems iffy. There's wonderful discussion in that working group about this that I was very impressed by.
Yeah, I think in a different country has been a different regulations from the background of cultures or any government reactions. In this case, maybe you mentioned the U.S. State law has been some of the issues. So, how they can improve their the regulatory requirements under these conditions?
Yeah, so I think California has done really progressive work about the constitutional right to privacy that not many, if any, other states have within the United States. So there's something to learn there. Illinois in our federation also has made great leaps around biometrics protections that the other states haven't. So I think as these states make the progress, seeing how we can apply them to more states or at a federal level will be important. I think there's also a lot to learn from GDPR and those working group discussions. While GDPR administration might not be perfect, there's a lot of wisdom in the policy and the process they've gone through to get there that can inform U.S. lawmakers. They don't have to start from scratch. There's so few labor protections in this country overall, and the views of the employment relationship are often quite disrespectful and dismissive towards employees. I think if we can move to a more honest view of employment relationships, like what I was just mentioning with the GDPR Article 29 working group, that's a first step. But then looking how we carry over some of the same protections and start building similar practices that they have in Europe.
I understand. So now we jump to it's a little bit different topic so far. So you're working on some of the great project. The one is the Great Fire and Apple censorship. So could you tell us about this project a little bit? And so how does it connect to the privacy?
Yeah, so I worked on this project with a group called Great Fire for several months this year. Great Fire is this wonderful group established to try to give people in China ways to circumvent the Chinese Great Firewall. And it's since expanded to some additional projects like this Apple censorship project I worked on. Apple censorship was created after Great Fire apps for circumventing censorship were removed from the Apple App Store by Apple at request of the Chinese government. And the activists were quite shocked that Apple would be complicit in censorship compared to Apple's kind of marketing on freedom of expression and human rights. So Apple censorship became this watchdog group watching Apple's App Store. They created a tool to monitor takedowns so they could follow up and see if it was something a developer did on their own or if it was censorship, and then try to highlight those instances and push back. And then one area that's always really contentious with these types of things is VPN apps. So VPNs provide people some level of privacy on what they do online, and allow them ways to circumvent censorship. So of course, censorship-driven governments are always quick to try to get VPN apps taken down from the App Store. So that was one area we really focused on. And the project taught me a lot about some of the ways that these big tech companies are able to influence privacy outside their own platforms. So as they do this content moderation, and you might not think of content moderation with Apple, like the same you might at Twitter or Facebook, but they are with their App Store, and they've been caught more than several times, numerous times, censoring via their App Store, taking down apps that maybe it's not even direct content, but it's things like VPNs that would allow someone the courage to go access additional content, feeling that they'd have some privacy. And Apple's taking those down and not even communicating that they're doing it or why, which is troubling.
I see. So the Apple is the one of the leading company try to protect the consumer privacy, but on your project, on your research so far, there is some of the concerns related to some of the privacy actions. So then do Apple customers and Apple employees concerns intersected? Do you think about it?
Yeah, definitely. So for example, that app on my iPhone that was taking the secret videos of me all the time, it took videos also, not just when I was at home or work, but when I'm running errands, hanging out with friends and class, so on. So it's capturing non-employees in that data too, and assumably also gathering all of their biometrics. Even kids, anyone that's around me, it would take a video when it thought it saw a face. So who knows how many people were stored in that data, which is horrifying, right? So these people had no idea they were even being captured, for one, which is an issue. And then two, if Apple claims that the fact they're even doing this is top secret, that they'd fire an employee for even talking about it, we couldn't even warn people they'd be captured if they were around our phones, which is really concerning. And Apple very heavily pressures their R&D teams to have one phone, just one for work and personal, and have the work device with all of this, very invasive configuration on it for testing and quality and all of this. I mean, they'd monitor and send us emails when we're not on that internal device. Be like, you need to be sure you're on this 24/7. So we're carrying around this essentially spyware, not just for us, but anyone around us. And then similarly, their employee privacy policy, which says we have no expectation of privacy whatsoever, and they'll even spy on our personal devices and our friends' personal devices if they feel like it. So a non-employee with an iPhone might think they're protected by whatever the consumer privacy policy is, but apparently no, if they're friends or talking to an Apple employee, now they have no privacy too, but they were never told. And I also brought up the concerns in my complaint to their governments that this would apply, my friends in London, my friends in Paris, my friends in Cork. These people are also protected by GDPR. Well, not UK anymore. They have their own version, but there's other privacy protections that I don't know how Apple's getting away with this. It's very concerning to me. So I think other people should be concerned too with that. Clearly by Apple's own internal policies, which I've now pushed and tried to make public because I want to cause conversation about this, they're not respecting those consumer privacy policies. If there's footnotes, maybe talking to an employee, maybe talking about, who knows what, we don't even know. So I think we should all be concerned about the privacy of big tech employees. I mean, the entanglements with these privacy intrusions, as I've been talking about, but I think also these internal practices really show how these companies actually feel about privacy, regardless of what their marketing is. So we should ask a lot more questions.
Thank you. So maybe we should progressions to making a forward and safety place in tech companies, and also the other companies as well, because a lot of companies try to become a digital first. Maybe it's been a migrations to go to the digital environments. Of course, it includes employees' privacy and customer privacy. So in this case, what should we look for the futures? What we can do together with those companies? They still embracing some of the issues, but they can improve. They can improve together with this. So do you have any good things for the future?
Yeah, I think we should all be more critical of employment practices in the United States generally. We're so far behind other nations. But specifically also with this privacy and surveillance, it should sound crazy for a big corporation to formally claim their employees should have no expectation of privacy anywhere for the rest of their lives, which is what that policy implies, if not says outright, just because we sign an employment agreement. We all need to push back on that type of reasoning. And you can keep an eye on my work and see how these cases progress against Apple. Thanks to Apple's bizarre justification for firing me, that's now the crux of my lawsuits. So we'll be discussing everything we've been talking about through this session in agencies in court, probably for years to come. I'm really hoping that fight and those discussions do drive some progress, or at least further conversation and critical analysis on all of this.
Thank you. So lastly, I direct you to share some of the message to the listeners, because the employment, the privacy, also the customer privacy is one of the concerns. So maybe you have some of the great experience, great ideas to share to solve these issues together for the future. So that's very happy to give and share your message.
Oh, I wish I had the solution. I think our very first step is just people pushing back on the norms in the United States right now. The norms are really concerning, which is they work at these big tech companies. It's fine if they have no rights. They sign some contract. That seems very common to hear, which again is extremely concerning, especially with these big tech companies, the stuff they've already been caught doing, the need for more whistleblowers who probably shouldn't even have to become whistleblowers. They could just, talk to a government, ask for help, ask for intervention. When there's no privacy, when you're under surveillance, you're censored. It's implicit censorship because you're always being watched. You don't feel like you have that privacy that you can have conversations with your coworkers about, is this right? Or talk to a government and say, this feels like they might be breaking a law. Can you help me understand? Because not only feels like your employer is watching you 24/7, they say they are. Like that, the global implications of that and consumer implications are enormous and highly concerning. So again, I wish I had the solution for all of it, but I think right now, being more critical, dismissing what these companies have been telling us should be the norm, starting to demand basic privacy rights. Again, even California is so far behind GDPR, and California is probably the most progressive of this that I've seen of all of the United States. So getting them to catch up with basic privacy protections for employees, really demanding better treatment. And then highly recommend, like if a company comes out and says, we fired an employee because they protested our arguably unlawful and unethical surveillance, like roast that company, especially if it's hypocritical of their marketing message, right? Of, okay, well, help me understand, where do you really stand on this? Because your practices don't match what you're saying. So I think as we start pushing back, we start having more critical discussion. I think that's where we start building the policy of what makes sense for our states and at a federal level for these protections. I think we're just so far behind, like even starting the conversation still needs to begin.
Yeah, that's a great message. I think it's very important to include the variety of the dialogues in between the corporate structures. So it's a time to discuss more things, what we can do together to create a better future. So this is our final goal. It's not the one takes all, it's a win-win. So thank you for having the conversation, Ashley, this moment.
Thank you so much for having me. I really hope this helps folks think about this at a deeper level.
Thank you.